Mr. Chair, before they get their seats, maybe I can get the floor.
Okay, colleagues, we're going to start. Well, good morning to our colleagues, certainly our witnesses, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to meeting number 60 of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. And of course, today we are continuing our study on Bill C-51. And so we have witnesses with us here this morning that we will have the opportunity to hear from. They'll have up to 10 minutes as our orders stand with regard to an opening statement. Hopefully they will be briefer than that in order to allow a little bit more time for Q&A from our members. And we will start off. Of course, I will first welcome David Harris, Director of the International Intelligence Program in Cygnus, Strategic Research. And we have as well as an individual, Zarquad Nawaz, thank you so much. And also as an individual, we have Ray Boisvert, President, Chief Executive Officer, IC Integrated Strategy. So we will go right at it, so we will not waste any time whatsoever. Mr. Harris, you're up, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm David Harris, a lawyer and Director of the International Intelligence Program in Cygnus Strategic Research Incorporated. I've had about 3 decades' experience in intelligence affairs, including service as an intervenor counsel before the Air India inquiry and Yakabuchi internal inquiries, subjects that have arisen, of course, in the course of your considerations. Canada's security situation is deteriorating. Conventional military and hostile intelligence challenges are manifest, and terror's reach into Canada should have been apparent years before October's terror murders galvanized the public. Canada's position is complicated vastly by an enormous per capita immigration rate, approaching 300,000 per annum, 500,000 including so-called temporary visa holders, many from jurisdictions where we have little access for screening purposes. Bill C-51 is a partial response to our security predicament. It attempts to come to grips with issues of information sharing, aviation security, terrorist propaganda, and disruption operations. The government deserves our support for the effort, but adjustments may be necessary. Proposed CSIS disruption measures, a necessary tool, could benefit from more consideration and perhaps extensive review approaches. Terrorism advocacy provisions must be consistent with Charter free expression guarantees, and the proposed Criminal Code subsection 83.221(1) should be clarified. Review mechanisms connected to the admirable objective of facilitating information sharing within government should be reinforced. And having said all this, we should find some reassurance in the fact that government activity is subject, of course, to the Constitution. Before proceeding in detail, I'm obliged to clarify matters arising from a recent committee session. There, I learnt later to my surprise, I was named by a member as the source of information upon which was based a question for a witness, the representative of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM. The NCCM representative responded by saying that the question or questions were, quotes, McCarthy-esque, unquotes. Clarification will be important to the committee's truth-seeking function, and the relevance of these comments in national security terms will become readily apparent. And my remarks on this subject are simply my personal opinion on a matter of pressing public interest based on my having followed this group's progress across about 15 years. The NCCM was founded in 2000 as the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE-CAN, the Canadian chapter of the Washington, D.C.-based Saudi-funded Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, C-A-I-R. This Canadian chapter was founded by Dr. Shima Khan with the assistance of Mr. Faisal Kuti, among others. In 2003, as CARE-CAN founding chair, Dr. Khan swore an affidavit asserting that CARE-CAN was under the direction and control of the U.S. mother organization. By about 2004, several significant former U.S. CARE personalities and other associates had been convicted of terrorism-related offenses, CARE's former National Civil Liberties Coordinator among them. For a period during her CARE-CAN chairmanship, Dr. Khan sat on the U.S. CARE organization's board. According to a 2006 National Post report, CARE-CAN contributed payments to the Washington office from CareCan revenue. In 2007, the U.S. Department of Justice designated the Care Mother Group.
Mr. Chair, witnesses have been invited here to testify on Bill C-51 before us rather than to testify on the background of other witnesses whom we've already heard. So I would ask the Chair to remind the witness of the question of relevance to the matter before us.
The Chair would do that, but the Chair would also acknowledge that the witness has an opportunity to respond to previous testimony that has been given relative to either statements he made or did not make. But I would certainly encourage the member to, or the witness to, try to stay, as close as possible to Bill C-51 with regard to obviously the purpose and intent of the bill, but certainly you have the right to defend either allegations and or improprieties that you deem to be fit that would cast either a negative or a positive light on testimony that has been given at this committee. So carry on, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2007, the U.S. Department of Justice designated the Care Mother Group an unindicted co-conspirator in the successful U.S. Holy Land Foundation terrorist funding prosecution. When CARE challenged the Justice Department designation in U.S. District Court, the court upheld the designation, ruling that, quotes, the government has produced ample evidence excuse me, to establish the associations of CARE with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist entity under Canadian and U.S. law. The FBI ended outreach dealings with the Care Mother organization in 2008, and the relevance of this to outreach and aspects involving counter-radicalization relative to the legislation will become increasingly relevant. In 2013, CareCan, the Canadian chapter, changed its name to the present National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM. Some argued that this was an attempt to divert attention from its CARE US connection. If so, this has been undermined by the NCCM name change statement indicating that NCCM and CareCan remain the same organization despite the name change. The NCCM news release stating this appears to have been removed from the NCCM CareCan website, but I'd be pleased to furnish the committee with a copy. Several high-level NCCM officials and staff from the CareCan days remain in comparable positions in NCCM. Detractors assert that NCCM CareCan has failed to condemn publicly and by name the U.S. mother organization for its radical connections and the terror convicts related to that U.S. organization. Some note a possible NCCM CareCan disinclination to reveal financial books and other records likely to explain its involvement with CARE in Washington and other links. Others have expressed concern about the organization's alleged tendency to spread an exaggerated and divisive victimhood narrative at a time when many worry about alienating Muslim youth. NCCM CareCan's civil liberties bona fides have been doubted by some as a result of CareCan's part in the 2000s in what has been claimed to have been a libel lawfare campaign by it and its mother group to silence media questions about them with multiple libel lawsuits. Please see Dr. Daniel Pipe's analysis titled CARE's Growing Litigiousness. It appears that a public relations backlash forced NCCM CareCan and CARE to dismiss their own libel lawsuits and give up on lawfare, at least at that time. As reported in Maclean's, I was one of those commentators and civil liberties defenders who was sued in libel, fought to defend the responsible exercise of Charter Section 2 free expression and journalistic freedom, and forced CareCan NCCM to shut down its own suit without apology or payment. In 2014, NCCM CareCan and the Islamic Social Services Association, ISSA, the latter led by NCCM CareCan board member Shahina Siddiqui, prepared a so-called counter-radicalization handbook, United Against Terrorism. But the RCMP, which had contributed a chapter to this, withdrew its support for the project owing to, quotes, adversarial, unquote, aspects of parts of the text. There were also criticisms of the handbook's selection of recommended Islamic scholars, some of whom were said to be among this continent's most radical. One of several examples, Dr. Jamal Badawi, an Egyptian-born Canadian who has been described as an international Muslim Brotherhood leader who is a U.S. unindicted co-conspirator and has reportedly advocated physical punishment for wives and polygamy. Badawi spent years as a CareCan-era official. The handbook also recommended Siraj Wahhaj, who appeared on a U.S. government list of 1993 World Trade Center bombing unindicted co-conspirators and reportedly has made extreme statements. Recommendee Imam Ziad Shakir was condemned for his ideology by U.S. moderate leader Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who has appeared before this committee, and the Anti-Defamation League. Despite the RCMP's withdrawal from the project, I recently heard that the handbook continues to be distributed at home and abroad with the RCMP's name on the cover, a disturbing situation. And so to the present, I trust that this personal view of the record will cast a clarifying light on the NCCM's allegation before this committee that close questioning of the organization amounts to, quotes, McCarthy-esque, unquotes, conduct. Perhaps my analysis might assist the committee and Canadians in general in weighing pertinent testimony. I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And we will go to Ms. Nawaz. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to participate in this very important discussion on Bill C-51. But no one can thank you more than my two sons, because this is parent-teacher conference time in Regina, Saskatchewan, and my boys had just gotten an unexpected reprieve. But I'd like to reassure the committee that as soon as I get back home, I will be rescheduling that appointment with their teachers. But I'm not here today to burden you with my domestic drama as a parent, but to talk to you all about my feelings about Bill C-51. I'm concerned about the negative rhetoric that's surrounding Bill C-51 and how this government sees the place of Muslims in Canada. Let me tell you a little bit about my own experience. Although you've probably all guessed by now, I'm not a lawyer or an academic. I'm primarily known in Canada as the creator of the TV series Little Mosque on the Prairie, and now the author of Laughing All the Way to the Mosque, which is a memoir of my experiences growing up Muslim in Canada. So I've spent a lot of time thinking, writing, and creating work about being a Canadian of Muslim faith. A few weeks ago, I was in France speaking to my French editor in a cafe in Paris. She asked me why I kept referring to myself as a Canadian. The question caught me off guard. I asked her what she meant. She said she's never met a Muslim who had such fierce loyalty to her country. I wanted to know how Canada had generated such passion in its citizens. The question caught me off guard. I didn't realize I was exuding so much Canadian fervor. It was almost un-Canadian. But to be honest, I had never considered why I loved Canada so much. I wasn't even born in Canada. I was born in Liverpool, England, where my father was a civil engineer working on the Mersey tunnels. I was 5 years old when the Canadian recruiters tried to convince my father to move his family to Canada, where they offered him the promise of a better life. He already had a good life and a good job in England, but there was something about their incredible zeal for wanting him to consider Canada as his country. My mother had had enough of England's rainy weather, which was aggravating her asthma, so she voted yes. So excluding the First Nations, who are the only Indigenous people to this great land, our family, like every other Canadian family that is here today, left our home and moved to Canada. We joined the rich history of Muslim migration, which started at Canada's founding in 1867. Back then, Muslims were farmers and fur traders who settled in Western Canada, primarily Alberta, where the first mosque was built in 1938 and is now located at the Museum of Fort Edmonton Park, where I had the honor of visiting a few months ago. We settled in Brampton, Ontario. My father was employed as the part of a team of engineers that built the CN Tower in Toronto in the 1980s. Growing up, I was acutely aware that my family and I were part of the 250,000 immigrants that Canada needed to let in every year in order to maintain a healthy tax base if we were to survive as a nation. Even as a child, I would find myself worrying about the Minister of Immigration and the Minister of Revenue. Did they stay up late at night, wringing their hands in worry? Did they fantasize about adding fertility drugs to Canada's water supply in order to help grow our taxation base? Like a lot of Canadians who took their kids to church, synagogue, or temple, my parents took us to the mosque to learn about Islam. We went to a mosque in Toronto, which is a converted church, so in my mind, mosques were basically churches with pews removed. To this day, I'm never really comfortable in a mosque unless it has a choir balcony and stained glass windows with crosses in them. It was Canadian culture and mosque culture that fused in my brain as a child. Then in the 1990s, I started to wear hijab. I was one of the first waves of Muslim women in Canada to do so. The teachers at school were a little worried about my newfound religious zeal, but for the most part I was ignored and allowed to practice my faith as I chose. In those days, no one cared what you wore as long as you weren't infringing on anyone's rights. You could stand in a citizenship ceremony wearing the Pope's hat or a niqab studded with diamonds for all the Minister of Immigration cared at the time. Although the Minister of Revenue would be very interested in where those diamonds had come from and had they been taxed accordingly. Human rights, pluralism, democracy, and feminism mixed into my cultural and religious upbringing. I watched the documentary Half the Kingdom made by Canadian Jewish feminists about sexism in the synagogue and thought if Jewish women could proudly champion their faith while still criticizing patriarchal practices within it, then so could I. I followed in their footsteps and made the documentary Me in the Mosque about similar practices in my community. 2 years later, I pitched a television series at the Banff Television Festival about a Toronto lawyer who gives up his lucrative Bay Street law career to become a penniless imam of an impoverished mosque renting space in an even more impoverished church. A mosque in a church has been the single most defining feature of my life growing up as a Canadian. Little Mosque on the Prairie then became the most unlikely TV hit ever to hit Canadian airwaves. The entire world paid attention when the show aired. Little Mosque was forged from my experience growing up, seeing my faith through the lens of Canadian human rights and the struggle of Islamophobia outside my community and the struggles of patriarchy within it. Little Mosque currently airs in over 60 markets around the world. Over the years, I've had reporters from other countries watch the show in fascination. What I came to learn later was this show was reflecting the essence of Canada and the success of multiculturalism. We were a country that has invited people from all races, ethnicities, faith groups, and built a society that values each person's right to practice their way of life the way they chose and still be a vibrant part of the Canadian fabric. In other words, the world was fascinated by what Canada got right and what so many other countries got wrong. We are a country of immigrants, from the Chinese to the South Asians, to the Ukrainians, to the Italians, that literally built Canada from the ground up, with each wave of newcomers building upon the success of the last wave. Success for each group has meant success for everyone. People ask me if being Muslim has held me back in Canada, but I always answer that I've always felt cherished and loved by my country. Even after 9/11 in Regina, Saskatchewan, an elderly woman grabbed my hand and said, while I was shopping, and said, "Don't blame yourself for what happened. You are not responsible." Those feelings of affection and belonging got me through very difficult days when I felt the world would turn on my community for a crime committed by a group of violent extremists that claimed to represent my faith. But in the last few months, my husband and I have started to worry about what the negative rhetoric from this government about Muslims in Canada is costing us. I worry that certain sentiments are starting to tear at the very fabric of our nation. I worry about what a child whose mother wears niqab will be feeling as he listens to his Prime Minister talk about her in such disrespectful language. Malala Yousafzai, who received a Nobel Peace Prize and an honorary Canadian citizenship, also has a mother who wears niqab. Would she be welcome here? This isn't who we are as Canadians. It goes against our basic belief in Canadian values. It feeds straight into the rhetoric of international extremists who want Muslims to feel alienated from society, to feel like we're not wanted and don't belong here. To prevent feelings of alienation, mosques across the country are urging their members to ignore these Islamophobic sentiments and continue to be engaged members of society, to participate, to contribute, to volunteer, to play our part in making Canada safe and secure. We as citizens will cooperate with the RCMP and our police forces with the laws currently in place. An engaged citizenry is and always has been the best defense against terrorism and radicalization to criminal violence. As a community, we are doing everything in our power to combat the feelings that we have suddenly become a problem in Canada. But I am worried. I am a mother. I have 4 children, 2 daughters. One is studying in France and doesn't call home nearly enough. Another is a lifeguard and swimming instructor. She got a concussion the other week while playing rugby for the University of Regina team and won't listen to her parents about maybe taking a break so her brain will heal properly. I have 2 boys in Campbell High School who play video games way too much and need to do a much better job at cleaning the bathrooms at home. One just turned 16, which means I have to go through the rite of passage that every parent dreads, risk my life on Canadian highways as I teach him how to drive. My husband works as a psychiatrist specializing in child and adolescents for the mental health services in the city of Regina. His father settled in Regina, Saskatchewan over 40 years ago as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. He founded the first mosque in Saskatchewan where my kids learn their dreaded Arabic lessons every weekend. My husband and I worry about the cost of sending 4 kids to university, who are already there. We worry about what will happen to the economy of our western provinces because of lower oil prices. We worry about the thousands of Aboriginal women who have been murdered and their crimes never solved. I worry that domestic assault kills more women in Canada per year than all the police and firefighters combined. I worry about not recycling enough and adding to the plastic island that's forming somewhere in the Pacific. And I worry about what Bill C-51 will do to our country. A healthy and vibrant and engaged Muslim community is the best defense against terrorism and radicalization towards criminal violence. And Bill C-51 undermines that. The increased marginalization and hysteria against Muslims is not the answer. What we really need is to work with each other in all different levels of society with mutual respect and cooperation. We need mosques to be more engaged with the social safety net of their communities so we can more easily bring help to the most vulnerable among us. Muslims have contributed much to this great country and will continue to be a vital force in the coming elections. But the sense of belonging is also a vital ingredient for a civil society to succeed. It's what's missing in Europe. What I saw there was a broken Muslim population that knows it's not wanted or accepted. But I grew up as an empowered Canadian citizen who loves her country and loves her faith and has never been asked to choose between them. And that is what I told my French editor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nawaz. And, if it's any comfort, I can assure you this committee has heard significant testimony with regard to the significant gap between Islam and Islamism. It's a dramatic difference, and I thank you for certainly bringing your perspective here today. And we will now go to Mr. Boisvert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Je vous remercie beaucoup de l'occasion que vous m'avez.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you about Bill C-51.
As the Assistant Director of Intelligence, this was after almost 3 decades of work as an intelligence officer, a manager, and a senior executive of the service. Au cours de ces 30 années, j'ai été un témoin privilégié.
Over these 30 years, I was a privileged witness to the growth of the organization and its adaptation to the threats that have continued to emerge in these turbulent times.
CSIS in 1984, it was really all about the Cold War. It was about hunting spies or looking for alleged subversives. Concomitantly, it would also involve homeland-based terrorism, such as that which was represented through Armenian and Sikh extremism events in the 1980s. In that first decade, I also witnessed the advent of Shia Hezbollah violence against the West, particularly in places such as Lebanon. And subsequently, it was the emergence of right-wing militia groups in the U.S. and white supremacists in Canada during the 1990s, and of course throughout Europe today. Then I had a front-row seat for the emergence of a new form of political religious terror linked to Sunni extremism, that of Al-Qaeda with its multiple permeations, be it the SECU or Al-Qaeda affiliates, or the current perversion which is known now as the Islamic State. Au fil de ma longue carrière au sein de la sécurité nationale.
Throughout my long career in national security and with my role as Chief Executive Officer for the group that was responsible for counterterrorism at CSIS, I've never witnessed threats that are so intense that weigh upon us around the world. We have never had to face threats that are as varied, serious, and complex.
Counterterrorism, I would be remiss if I did not draw to the attention of the committee members the fact that the current threat environment is so much more than Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State or homegrown radicalization as such. Top of mind is cyber. From the substantive impact it continues to have on our future prosperity through the theft of intellectual property to the targeting of our critical infrastructure. That, in my estimation, of course, is that it is not yet properly defended. Par ailleurs, comme nous le voyons dans certains dossiers.
Furthermore, as we see in certain hot-button files like that of Ukraine, we also have to deal with the resurgence of a very important Soviet-style threat. The low-intensity hybrid war being led against the West by Russia's totalitarian regime is far from innocuous, and I will even go so far as to add that it is probably, among all the dangers that threaten us, the risk that is the most neglected and the most underestimated.
Nuclear proliferation, it's once again a cause for deep concern as it involves a potential renewed race to acquire weapons in the Middle East, such to match those of Israel's capability or Iran's aspirations? And what of China rising? Be it foreign interference, its ongoing military transformation, or its newly declared investments in an aggressive multi-sector cyber espionage program. My point in underlying all of these is to suggest that enhancements to proposed C-51, particularly those affecting the CSIS Act, should not just be viewed as being exclusive benefits to the country's counterterrorism programs. À mon avis, le climat mondial n'a jamais...
In my opinion, the world's climate has not been this threatening since the troubled years, that preceded the First World War, and it seems like a very good time to conduct an in-depth review of Canada's security laws. I firmly believe that our country must be able to clearly understand the issues and to react effectively on multiple fronts.
Now allow me to return to the principal matter of the growing threat to terrorism in the 21st century. It will no doubt be a long-term struggle to defeat this new terrorism variant. As a preventative measure, let me say this, that we must not allow this to be viewed or articulated as a challenge involving a specific religion, as it is not. It is, based on my professional experience, a struggle against a political religious ideology that has all of the DNA of fascist movements through history that have typically filled the social and economic voids. It is a battleground, however, where a combination of social investment, diplomacy, law enforcement, intelligence operations, and military capability will be necessary for us to succeed. Il est encore plus important, cependant, d'éviter les mesures contre-productives.
It is even more important, however, to avoid counterproductive measures and to not allow extremists to win the war of public opinion by convincing people that we are indeed in a war between the West and Islam.
Context matter, so do facts. As recently noted in the Department of Homeland Security DHS report between 2007 and 2010, approximately 200 attacks linked to AQ and ISIS occurred worldwide. Available statistics for 2013 from the same organization, DHS, show that 600 such attacks linked to the same organizations have occurred. Il va de soi que la multiplication par 3 du nombre d'attaques.
The fact that the number of attacks linked to al-Qaeda has increased by threefold is hardly encouraging. The tragic deaths of 23 people in Tunis, mostly European tourists, is a striking example of how difficult it is to ensure a society's security before this type of blind terror.
Decade, I can attest to the fact that we had recognized the age of globalization that had applied to terrorism in equal measure to that of communications, manufacturing, and the services industry. You should be aware, therefore, that we had purposely evolved our operational doctrine to meet that reality. The new approach, in essence, was to engage the threat wherever it may emerge. This was seen as essential and has proved to be very successful in thwarting a number of threats targeting Canadians at home and abroad. Malgré ce succès et pendant mon mandat à l'une des postes de...
Despite the success, during my tenure at one of the highest positions in the fight against international terrorism, I was seldom able to offer Canadians a high level of protection. You're wondering why, perhaps? The answer is simple. With every day that goes by, new situations come up and new unexpected scenarios emerge, and the problems that come with them are never easy to solve. Also, those who create the threats against which we have to fight learn and innovate at the same rhythm that we do.
Contain a drug-resistant bacteria, individuals and entities that cause harm were learning and adapting to this new threat environment. Threat actors went to school, as they say, via trial transcripts, news reports, procedural disclosures, or through the stolen tradecraft secrets as those allegedly delivered to the world by Edward Snowden. The ongoing challenge to secure this country is also due to the strategic shift of most terror organizations, moving from complex plots intended to deliver large-scale atrocities to small, often individual types of attacks known broadly as lone actors. Il s'ensuit que les possibilités de détection des attaques et la fenêtre d'intervention.
The possibility of detecting attacks and the window of opportunity to intervene between the planning of an attack and the attack itself is constantly diminishing has been diminishing over the last 5 years. Reaction times are shorter and shorter, and the possibility of countering troublemakers' plans have diminished. Finally, when I occupied this position, my fears often came from the fact that the toolbox available to us was very limited by the CSIS Act.
Hampered the transfer of CSIS intelligence into viable evidence for the RCMP. Most importantly, however, was the reality that the 1984 CSIS Act, created for a Cold War-era threat, were involving often investigations that took years of slowly collected detail, was suddenly a living anachronism. Being limited to only collect, analyze, and report, as set out currently in Section 12 of the Act, on threats to national security, instantly jammed our ability to intercede with creative, low-cost, low-impact interdiction efforts. In other words, threat diminishment activities. Pour vous donner les moyens de mieux étayer votre réflexion, sachez que...
To give you the means to better support your deliberations, please know that there are many ideas that have been raised about the way in which the world security organizations can effectively counter threats that weigh against a society or a group of countries that share certain values. Simply put, I would say that security is above all more an art than an exact science, and probably much more an art than anything else.
Is about weighing risks. It is not, as some may hope, predicting the future. Although with the advent of ever-improving advanced analytics, analysts and enforcement teams are shifting that dynamic. Counterterrorism work is multifaceted. It's about early detection, the assessment of its potential to strike, the allocation of resources around it, and weighing the many legal and policy considerations that may apply. In addition, and where the risk management piece really applies in counterterrorism, is that the teams engaged in that area must continuously reevaluate their targets, and in a process that constantly challenges their judgments on each and every case. And this is done almost every single day of every single week. It is my estimation that we have been both good and lucky. The former, of course, is almost always the byproduct of hard work and smart action. My fear, however, is that without some radical transformation of the enabling anti-terrorism framework, Canada will fall behind, and our luck will run out again. Les critiques ont jusqu'à maintenant convaincu un segment important de la population que...
Critics have, up until now, convinced a large segment of the population that these measures are dangerous and useless. I disagree with this point of view, and I reject the slippery slope argument, because my 30 years of experience on the ground have demonstrated to me that Canadians' fundamental values, such as the respect for human rights, are threatened a great deal less than our interests, which are exposed to a large number of malicious acts.
Certainly. So, since its creation of the CSIS as a service, it has been subjected to considerable review, and I might add that it is considered by its peers as a class-leading organization because of that review, and not despite it. Therefore, I strongly believe that in the age of accountability for which we are in, agencies and their leadership teams must be held to account. They must explain what they are doing, why it is necessary, and if possibly, generally speaking, when and where is it being done on behalf of Canadians. In addition, but only in the rarest of circumstances, and in the most guarded of circumstances, they may also have to talk a little bit about how they
I'm
do
sorry,
that
Mr.
work.
Boisvert, but you're well over your time. I'm going to have to cut you off here. I'm very, very sorry, sir, but we are certainly eating into the time for Q&A. So
I've covered the basis of my.
You're fine here now.
I am
fine. Thank you very kindly. We will now go to the rounds of questioning. We'll start off with Mr. Falk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for coming here this morning. I've had a pleasant visit already this morning with Ms. Nawaz, and she told me that she isn't the actress that my notes say that she is, but she is the creator of the TV series. Mr. Harris, Mr. Boisvert, I want to thank you for your work in protecting Canada, in your involvement in the different security organizations that you've been actively participating in. Mr. Harris, I want to also thank you for your comments, clarifying comments from a previous witness from NCCM, and also in the relationship of the comments that you made. You provided clarification on CARE and I want to thank you for that. I'm a little surprised that at the intolerance demonstrated from my NDP colleagues on the other side of the table in truth-seeking and fact-finding, while at the same time showing a great deal of tolerance to a witness that made a personal attack on a parliamentarian. It strikes me as being very odd. So I want to thank you for the clarification that you provided here this morning. We've listened to a lot of testimony from people from the Muslim community, and one of the comments that we heard yesterday from Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, struck me, and I wrote it down because I thought it was noteworthy, and I just want to repeat it. He says, "Not all Muslims are radical Islamists, but all radical Islamists are Muslim." And that's interesting. And we've heard testimony at this committee from a lot of people from the Muslim community that say this bill does not reach far enough. And they are very concerned with the radicalization of especially the youth within their community, and concerned that is not at all representative of the Muslim community as a whole. But when I look at our bill, the bill isn't a bill about race or culture or religion. The bill is about anti-terrorism, and it doesn't define any of those things in the bill itself. And so I want to ask you a few comments based on your experience in the security organizations that you've been involved in with CSIS. If you could provide a little bit more commentary on the provisions in the bill for disruption purposes or for the powers of disruption that this bill provides for. Mr. Harris, I'd like to begin with you, if you could comment on that.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the disruption powers as described are necessary, as I indicated earlier. They offer, as Mr. Boisvert beautifully phrased it, low-cost alternatives. And these can be very important in moving decisively when there may be a risk situation developing. I couldn't help but reflect upon the death of Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, who was, as you may recall, Mr. Chairman, the subject of fairly extensive efforts that were apparently to no avail, where I think the RCMP brought in some Muslims who were attempting to assist in the situation, maybe an imam, and so on. But in the end, we saw what the result was. Maybe this would have been unavoidable, even with certain disruption possibilities. Maybe there would have been peace bond options under the new legislation. It's very difficult to say. Now, when it does come to issues like disruption, however, it would be very important that the system be capable of following the execution of disruption exercises, operations, as authorized by federal warrant, as we're, I think, contemplating in this legislation. And it's not entirely clear to me that we necessarily have all of that back-end emphasis in hand yet, but I would be optimistic that that can be properly shaped. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Boisvert, you talked about all kinds of different threats. You talked about cyber threats and acting effectively. Do you see the measures in Bill C-51 as addressing the threats that you've alluded to?
I think the potential is clearly there because some of the state actors, some of the countries that support international terrorism are also some of the most important threats around proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, for example, and chemical weapons and other conventional weapons. There's also ultimately the idea that with more capability along the lines of more opportunities to be creative around investigative efforts that CSIS will undertake, that can be very transformative. As I mentioned in my comments, CSIS was created at the time where we were in the Cold War. We were focused on counter-espionage operations. Long-term, quite often an intelligence officer would arrive from the Soviet Union. We would take 4 years to decide whether or not that person was truly an intelligence officer or not. In today's threat environment, sometimes you have weeks, sometimes days, sometimes hours. And sometimes that threat can be very, very thin to notice on the threat scale. So as a result, the current mandate of CSIS is simply to collect intelligence, analyze it, and give advice. In the case of where we have to bring in a law enforcement agency such as the RCMP or CBSA, the efforts to try to take that intelligence and move it into usable evidence is very long, detailed process. I was involved in it in the Toronto 18 investigation and in subsequent terrorism-related charges, worked with the RCMP as the Director General of Counterterrorism. I can tell you it is a very complex choreography. This bill will give us a chance for our CSIS to do more directly deal with threats without having to engage in that choreography.
In a more timely basis.
Yes.
You also mentioned cyber threats, and I'd like you to expand a little bit on what, without talking about operational issues that are a privilege to yourself. Talk a little bit about the significance and the seriousness of the cyber threats that are out there, as well as maybe talk a little bit about the social media threats. We heard a lot about social media being one of the tools used by extremists to radicalize individuals.
We only have about 30 seconds, Mr. Boisvert. I'm sorry for the response.
You know, it's very difficult for me.
I realize that, sir.
Okay, well, in terms of cyber, it's one of those issues that is probably best addressed on the issue of radicalization, because that's really, I think, apropos for C-51. Getting at the messages of hate are very, very important. I don't blame the internet for radicalization, but I see it as being a very important vector for all that activity. The problem is that it's transglobal, it's amorphous, it is ubiquitous. The internet is everywhere. The bill will help to some degree where the content is stored within Canada, and I think it'll be a very effective tool that way to get that material off the net. But when servers are parked in other parts of the world in a jurisdiction, it'll be very, very difficult. Then it'll come down to perhaps some other active measures to get at that data, maybe take down that server, but then there's the complexity of action.
Fine, thank you very much. And now, Mr. Rousseau, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. I'll please ask you to put the translation device wherever needed. Le Canada est un pays où il y a 2 langues officielles pour le moment.
Canada is a country which, for the moment, has 2 official languages, and I will be speaking in French. And I'll start with Ms. Nawaz.
It's okay. I'll ask the chair if I could please have some extension on.
The situation, and we'll accommodate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's give it a try now, Mr. Rousseau.
First of all, it's an honor to have you here, Ms. Nawaz. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ms. Nawaz? Yes? First of all, I would like to recognize that it's extremely enriching to hear you talk about family, social, and environmental values, which so many Canadians share from coast to coast. That is such a perfect example of a multicultural Canada that many political actors dreamed of for decades. We heard a great deal of testimony since what happened in Saint-Jean and here on the Hill. And one of the most important elements we heard was how to fight radicalization. Radicalization and fighting it seems to be a real key for eradicating so many problems linked to certain individuals. You're a leader in your community. What is the situation in your Muslim community in Saskatchewan when it comes to fighting radicalization? What tools do you need in order to help your community to fight radicalization?
Thank you. It's interesting that you ask that question. In fact, today's Thursday, so on Saturday and Sunday and Monday, we will be holding a 3-day event in our mosque in Saskatchewan. One day, Saturday, is reserved for inviting non-Muslim members of our communities, government, social services, the universities, the school system, to come and talk to us about their concerns about the Muslim community, and we are providing them with a 1-day full workshop in terms of educational components about the needs of the Muslim community, how we can both work together to cooperate and meet each other. So we've organized a full-day workshop on Saturday. On Sunday, we are holding a town hall for the Muslim community where we can get people to talk openly and honestly about any concerns that anybody, parents, community members are having about their children, what's happening, anybody that's hearing anything or is concerned or is worried about issues. We want them to have a safe space where they can talk and feel that they are being listened to. Our imam will be there, members of our community will be there. We are engaging our community in dialogue so that if there are people who are feeling unsafe or would like to talk about it, there will be space for that. On Monday, we will be holding a press conference for the media where we will have members of the RCMP, the Regina City Police, the Imam, the President of the Islamic Association, who happens to be my brother-in-law, the President of the Muslim Students Association, the key members of the Muslim community together will be answering questions from the media about what Muslims in Saskatchewan are doing to make sure our youth are not being radicalized and what actions we're doing to prevent that. And to me, these are the type of actions that Muslims are engaging in across the country, which are valuable and more useful in terms of making our community feel like they're an integrated and vital part of the Canadian mosaic. So wait, 1 second.
Okay.
Does the sound come out of here? No, the other side. Yeah, okay, that would explain it, yes.
Est-ce que vous êtes en contact avec les autres mosquées?
Are you in contact with other mosques throughout Canada? Do you know if other initiatives of this type are being implemented? It seems that there are stakeholders from all levels of your community, including the RCMP. There's a great number of stakeholders who will speak openly about that situation. Do you know if other initiatives are being taken elsewhere throughout Canada?
Yes, these initiatives are taking place in almost every mosque in every province across the country, and we are aware of all of them, and we are helping each other do these activities. And this idea actually came to me from other communities, and they were doing that, and we had never held these type of activities in Regina before, so we are coming forward and making sure that this dialogue and cooperation and instruction is happening and that we maintain an open form of communication. My husband is a psychiatrist, as I have mentioned, and he will be at the town hall as a panel member, asking community members to talk to him if they have concerns about any issues that are happening. We have noticed over the years a larger group of converts coming to our communities than we've ever had before, and they tend to come from communities that are more vulnerable, and this is something new for us that we have not had to deal with in the past, and they feel like they're trying to look for some purpose or for some meaning. And this is something, our mosques were not set up as social service entities. They were set up as places where our kids learned Arabic on the weekend and learned Islam. So suddenly having this new group of people enter our communities is posing challenges. And so what we are trying to do is form social service community networks within our mosque system that we can network with the wider social service networks in our provinces and our cities so that we can prevent tragedies that we saw with the Ottawa shooter, because he had gone to a Canadian mosque and the mosque had recognized that there was a problem and had to change the locks to prevent him from disrupting the community. And we realized that it was the best that mosque could have done at the time, and I do not blame that mosque, but we need to be more proactive. So if that ever happens to us again, we need to find those vulnerable individuals more help so that these tragedies don't occur in the future.
Oh, we run out of time. It goes so fast. I realize. Mrs. James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses. I'm going to probably start with Mr. Beauvert. With some of your testimony, you've indicated you have 30 years of experience. On this side of the table, we've brought in a number of witnesses that have decades of experience dealing with terrorism, intelligence gathering, law enforcement, people who are really on the ground dealing with these various types of issues. And the common thread that we've heard from all of these witnesses is that the threat is real, that it's evolved. You've described it as so intense around the world, serious and complex. You've also indicated, you said something about critics say this bill is dangerous and useless. And I'm just trying to put into perspective the I don't want to say credibility, but what we're dealing with is terrorism, providing necessary tools to our national security agencies, tools that have been identified as gaps existing in current legislation, things that have been identified that have become very clear after recent attacks around the world. I mean, we only have to turn on the 6 o'clock news to see more people that are trying to travel overseas, families being torn apart, another terror attack happening here, people killed in other countries around the world. So we had a witness in, Inspector Irwin. He actually talked very specifically about different sections of this bill. He described the sections in the criminal code that exist today as being too restrictive and absolutely need the new measures in C-51. He talked about the information sharing aspects are absolutely crucial for law enforcement to deal with the threats that we have today. And he also talked about the importance of having safeguards, and he had said that, in fact, this bill provides adequate safeguards. So when we talk about hearing our critics say that this bill, and there was one, we've had a number of individuals come in from different civil liberties groups. One was the BC Civil Liberties Groups. You know, the sky is falling. You're not, you know, this is simply going to target protesters. We heard those same arguments back. You mentioned the original CSIS Act way back in 30 years ago. BC Civil Liberties were around then, same arguments. In the original Anti-Terrorism Act, we heard the same, you know, the sky is falling kind of attitude. The sky didn't fall in 1984, didn't fall in 2001, will not fall again in 2015, at least not from this bill. But I just wanted to speak to you specifically about the CSIS disruption abilities and the requirement to get a judicial authorization and approval. Right in the bill, it clearly states, with regards to the application to the judge, the criteria that's required. You know, there's been some misinformation that someone just can simply walk off the street, get someone to sign a piece of paper, and off they go, and they're going to be, you know, widespread mass hysteria is going to happen. But it's very clear. There are a number of points, reasonable grounds that the warrant's required, measures to be taken have to be reasonable and proportional. The identity of the persons have to be disclosed if known. Persons or classes of persons to whom the warrant is proposed has to be disclosed. General description of the place, the period not exceeding a number of days, and so on. But with regards to the actual, we've had at least 2 witnesses come in here, and perhaps they didn't fully read the bill or maybe did not fully understand it. But the judge has the ability to review that information and say no. They also, right within this bill, it says that the judge can apply any terms and conditions that the judge considers advisable in the public interest. So there are safeguards in there that the judge can place on a CSIS agent for whatever activities that they're going to undertake. So if you could please go into that and explain that judicial process, how it's required, how the safeguards are there, and how it's really going to give the tools necessary for CSIS to be able to disrupt threats. As you've said, things happen very quickly now. It's not like 30 years ago where you could build a case over long periods of time. Thank you.
Certainly. I take great offense to the common comment that's been made around the idea of the slippery slope and the fact that now anybody who has an issue that they'd like to protest will now become a target of the security establishment. I think you should not, as a group and individual, flatter yourself to that degree. Frankly, we never had enough time when I was the Director General of Counterterrorism or as the Assistant Director of Intelligence to do more than the top crust, those in the layer of the red, high-risk, high-probability zone. That meant that we had no time to even consider looking at any sort of lesser evils that were emerging out there. And I suspect, moving 4 years later, I hate to think about what my former colleagues are facing today. The second part is that lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent is implicitly and explicitly protected in the CSIS Act currently, and it's not changing with the new legislation. In fact, there's some pieces in there that reinforce that particular requirement. Lastly, and specifically your question on Section 21, the warrant process is the most onerous warrant process of any of its kind, in my estimation, around the world, and that's the current warrant process. The enhancements being proposed will just, in fact, add layers of requirements in terms of giving direction to the judiciary and obviously giving those who are composing the warrant, those are being the officers working at CSIS and the legal teams at the Department of Justice and the Public Safety Minister's office, to hit a new threshold that will be even more complicated and difficult. Unlike law enforcement sometimes, where you can get a warrant after about 3 or 4 pages on an affidavit or an information to seek, typical CSIS warrants are typically going back hundreds of pages per target, explaining the rationale and making the case to be able to attain those powers that allow us, at the time when I worked at CSIS, to intercept somebody's communications, for example, lawfully. So I am still encouraged that this will not change. In fact, my sense from reading the legislation is that those safeguards are protected and are further enhanced.
Thank you.
Actually, you have about 30 seconds.
Thank you. Just a very quick question to Mr. Harris. Thank you as well for being here. You talked about, in your opening remarks, you talked about C-51. We've had a number of witnesses come in again and talk about the evolving threat. We had a witness in here yesterday that said this has been going on for decades. The witness spoke very candidly. She was a Muslim woman as well, and said that since 2000 she's been raising the red flag. Do you think that Canada is too late? She compared us to countries around the world that are experiencing even more difficult situations with terrorism. Do you think Canada is too late coming to the table to try and deal with this at this point, or do you think we're headed to something worse if we stand here and do nothing?
I'm sorry, but our time is well expired. I do not have time for a response, and we will simply now go to Mr. Easter, please.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations. I want to first, Ms. Nawaz, I want to recognize your efforts that you outlined in response to a question to Mr. Rizzo, working with your mosque in your community, drawing other people in to build understanding and try and I guess, undermine some of those fears that are there. I'm increasingly concerned what I see in Canada about the ramping up, the inflaming, the fear factor and driving wedges. That's not the Canada that I know and love, and that's a concern. Let me turn to Mr. Boisvert. You said in your remarks that the toolbox, you support this bill, the toolbox available to CSIS under the to Canadians, I guess, under the 1984 Act was created in the time of the Cold War, and I agree. The problem, as I see it with this bill, is the government, for whatever reason, is, I think, bringing certain sections of the bill up to 2015, if I could say that, times. However, they're failing to bring up the other side of the equation, which is the proper balance to address some of the concerns out there that are those that are in the activist community. Lawful dissent, et cetera, is a concern. So do you believe that, do you see anything that can be done on the other side to bring that balance? You'd know well with your experience in CSIS that you do have to have the community inside. And what I can't understand, having been a former minister, is that why the government is so resistant to have an oversight. Because the last thing you want to have happen to you as a minister, have something happen under your watch that paints you in a bad light. And oversight is the greatest protection not only Canadians can have, but a minister can have as well. And so I'm strongly advocating oversight, parliamentary oversight. The Canadian Bar Association has went a little further than that. What's your views on that? Do we need to bring up both sides?
Yes, absolutely. Clearly on the issue of where Canadians feel about the threat of terror, polling numbers are consistent. It's a top priority issue for them. However, there's also some deep concern about this legislation. I don't think anybody should kid themselves. I'm clearly an advocate as a former practitioner that there are very important enhancements that will make us, yes, far more safe. We should not, as I said in my opening comments, we cannot identify this with any particular group, and of course there should be no stigma attached to any of this. It's about political religious ideology. But being a practitioner who appreciates a more full and complementary toolbox is one thing, but I also recognize I, like you, are in favor with commensurate levels of increased review. Because after working 30 years in that business, I don't think any of the seniors that I left CSIS with in the last few years would disagree with me, is that we were a better organization because of review, not despite, as I said in my comments. And we were very exceptional. I think we're very well respected by our peer group because of that. And the reason we were better is because we knew everything we did would eventually, at some point, face some form of review by somebody, Inspector General or CERC. That keeps the mind very sharp. Our young officers in the counterterrorism branch, at one point, I think 86% of those officers had less than 2 years service. Very young cohort, extremely talented, bright, engaged, but they needed very clear rules of how to work on things. Our continuous issue of rigor drove them crazy. Why do we have rigor? Because of review. As for oversight, slightly different issue. I'm not against parliamentary oversight. I think in this age of accountability, the leadership of organizations, be it the RCMP, CSE, or CSIS, should appear in front of parliamentarians and explain to Canadians what they're doing, why they're doing, and I think it'll grow the consistency of support. And I think it's a favorable outcome for everybody.
I think one of the difficulties, of course, as you know, is the government already cancelled the Inspector General, so that body is not there. But parliamentary oversight, what we're talking about, is similar to that of what our Five Eye partners have, in which a committee, all-party committee of parliamentarians would have access to classified information, and so can kind of keep a sharper eye from a political perspective on what's happening. You did talk about warrants.
Briefly, we're running out of time, sir.
Warrants with judges. Several witnesses have come to us and basically said that's not enough. The oversight of a judicial review ends when the warrant walks out the door. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, certainly compared to law enforcement, there are different mechanisms, no doubt. Part 6 criminal code warrants have different requirements for reporting back to even disclosing to the person under investigation that they were subject of a warranted activity. That's absent in national security warrants for very good reasons that we don't have enough time to go through. But there's no doubt there is not the same accountability. But rest assured, as we've seen with a couple of warrants, they're referred to as DIFs, the domestic interception of foreign communications of targets, involving a CSIS and CSE collaborative effort. The federal court had gone back and made a very clear pronouncement they were not pleased with one part of that activity. So there is opportunity and there is some forms of review.
Fine. Thank you very much. And our time has now expired. And I would certainly thank our witnesses at this time. I hope you've had, if not enjoyable, certainly an interesting time here today. And we do appreciate your comment and certainly your counsel. We will now suspend for 2 minutes. Okay, colleagues, we are now back in session for our second hour of testimony and Q&A. And witnesses we have before us today, the Chair will briefly introduce. We have from the Heritage Foundation, Mr. Stephen Bucci, Director from the Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy. And we have from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, David Cape, the Chair, and we also have Shimon Fogel, the Chief Executive Officer. And from the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association, we have Ziad Mia, Chair for the Advocacy and Research Committee, and as well as Mahid Pirboy, Vice Chair for the Legal Advocacy Committee. And the Chair apologizes if I did not pronunciate your names exactly as it should be, and please feel free to...
Vice Chair, I'm a member of the committee.
Oh, there we go.
So I don't want to take
Fine,
credit
thank you. Thank you very much. The Chair stands corrected. And so, as is traditional, from each group we have up to 10 minutes of testimony. The Chair and the committee would certainly appreciate it if you could shorten that as much as possible. That'll give us more time for Q&A. And without any further ado, we'll lead off. Mr. Bucci, carry on, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for inviting us to address the committee. I am Dr. Stephen Bucci, the Director of the Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy at the Heritage Foundation. And this is David and Sarah, my lead analyst for Homeland Security issues. The Heritage Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C., and what we're about to provide is our own opinions and should not be construed as official policy of the Heritage Foundation. I'm humbled to be asked to comment on Canadian Bill C-51, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2015. A Canadian friend kiddingly said, you're coming up here to explain our law to us. And clearly that's not our intent. The U.S. has gone through exactly this sort of debate, and we hope to give some additional illumination of these issues based on the American experience. Canada is our closest ally, friend, and partner. I recognize that, and I earnestly seek to add to that bond. I'm going to address a few general issues, and then my colleague will touch on some more specifics. The threat of terrorism is real, and unfortunately, despite our best efforts, that threat has grown. Today, that threat is from radical Islamist extremists. Tomorrow, it could be from others. But the key is that it's not hype, it's real. Canada sadly found that out last year during the attacks in Quebec and here in Ottawa. The challenge we face is that this particular enemy is coming after our peoples solely because they resent our freedom and tolerance. But they are very good at leveraging those same issues to their advantage against us. This threat comes from a very small, misguided part of the Islamic community, but even this small minority puts us at risk and must be prepared for. Security issues like the ones raised in C-51 are particularly tough for pluralistic democracies such as ours. Our leaders in both countries, regardless of political orientation, are responsible for the physical protection of our people and interests, but must also always protect our cherished civil liberties and constitutional rights. Any and every law we enact must achieve a balance between these two pillars. Too far in one direction, and our citizens bleed and die. Too far in the other, and the spirits of our nations die. Neither is acceptable. But even that is not enough. There must be strong oversight today and long-term auditing and monitoring to ensure that a well-intentioned law today is not misused sometime in the future. My review of C-51 leads me to conclude that this is just that sort of good faith attempt to achieve a balance between greater physical protection and without loss of civil liberties. In the various sections, there is a judicious expansion of info sharing and law enforcement authorities. But in each, there is also provisions for recourse and appeals. There is transparency and openness. It uses the minimum secrecy needed for effective security, and there is a wide use of warrants and judicial oversight. In short, this bill seems to balance security and liberty. Before I turn the microphone over to David, I would also like to mention something. In the U.S., right after 9/11, we went through the same sort of epiphany that your country has so recently gone through. And we tried to do a balancing act between these two pillars. Over time, we involved two different presidencies of widely different politics and attitudes. multiple Congresses with leadership trading hands between the parties and the entire federal judiciary, all involved in different sorts of oversight and decision-making. A line of balance was drawn. However, after the Edward Snowden releases, it became clear that at least a non-trivial number of American citizens didn't really like where that line had been drawn. And the United States now is sorting out how to re-wicker that and achieve that balance. I only raise this not because C-51 has similar programs to the ones that were problematic in the United States, but to encourage as much transparency in your process as possible. The transparency will give you the effectiveness without having the fight down the road. Canada and Canadians deserve that, and in the end, it will benefit your great people who are our brothers and sisters. And now I'd like to ask my colleague David to take the rest of our time.
Thanks, Steve.
Sir.
Members of the committee, it's my honor to be here today. As Steve mentioned, I'll take some of the remaining time to...
I'm wrong. I confused your time with our questioning time. You actually have just closer to 5.
Thank you. I'll take some of the remaining time to go over some of the specifics and use the U.S.'s recent experience to shine some light on the specific policies. So my understanding of the bill is that it enables most government institutions of Canada to share information for a security purpose with those institutions that have law enforcement or security responsibilities. So this is not the collection of additional data or additional programs, but this is merely breaking down the barriers between government organizations so that security organizations can access lawfully obtained information that is already in the government's possession. This policy makes eminently good sense and is similar to U.S. efforts following 9/11 to break down the silos of information to ensure that security personnel have the best information available to them. Canada seems to have a robust set of privacy laws and that govern the storage, use, and sharing of information and oversight by a privacy commissioner and other review committees, somewhat analogous to the way the U.S. has installed privacy officers throughout government agencies. It is important that this new level of sharing be overseen by the Privacy Commissioner and the appropriate review commissions to ensure that sharing is done in accordance with the law. Next, C-51 tries to build on Passenger Protect, the Canadian no-fly list. Currently, the Minister of Public Safety is authorized to deny transportation or require extra screening of any individual who is believed to be a threat to aviation security. C-51 would expand this authority and also be used to stop or screen individuals who seek to fly somewhere else to engage in terrorism. In the U.S., we have a similar system with no-fly and selectee lists, but is primarily focused on aviation security, not preventing terrorist travel. C-51 seeks to combat such travel, which, given the widespread concern of terrorists traveling to Syria and other locations in the world to commit terrorist acts, this addition is wise. Additionally, C-51 provides clear avenues for administrative and judicial recourse, an important thing since the appeals process for the U.S. no-fly list was found unconstitutional this past summer because of how difficult the process was to use. C-51 also makes it easier for Canadian officials to stop terrorists before they strike. C-51 makes it illegal to advocate for terrorism and allows terrorist propaganda to be seized with judicial adjudication. The bill also makes it easier for law enforcement to seek an arrest warrant or conditions of recognizance against a suspected terrorist if such actions would, quote, likely prevent the carrying out of a terrorist act.
And Sarah, I'm very, very sorry, but we have a call to vote in the House. Pardon? That is not the point of, okay, that is just simply the House opening?
Should be 10 o'clock.
Chair stands corrected again, thank goodness.
No worries. So C-51 is looking to increase the ability of law enforcement to stop terrorists before they strike, as I was mentioning. This includes expanding the ability to require various sureties and conditions of recognizance, including the surrender of one's passport and the requirement to remain in a given geographic area, similar to the way it could be used in a law enforcement sense now. Since these actions are done with judicial oversight and approval, these reforms seem to balance the need for security with the need for due process and civil rights. Since multiple sections of this bill would make it more difficult for radicalized individuals to travel, you should also consider how the government and civil society can de-radicalize or prevent the further radicalization of individuals who are no longer allowed to leave Canada. Finally, C-51 provides CSIS with the authority not only to collect and analyze intelligence on threats to Canada, but also allows it to, quote, take measures within or outside Canada to reduce the threat, unquote. Such actions are subject to judicial oversight and approval, as well as review by the Security Intelligence Review Committee, though some have suggested that more oversight is needed. This is perhaps one of the most significant changes in the law, as it seems to me, to reverse the decision Canada made following the McDonald Commission to split intelligence from security actions. In the U.S. experience, adding a new and different responsibility to an organization can be a challenge. For example, the FBI is the primary organization dedicated to counterterrorism investigations, but following 9/11, it was required to increase its intelligence capabilities, resulting in the creation of the National Security Branch and the Directorate of Intelligence. But the FBI has a certain culture, a culture of special agents and law enforcement that drives it to investigate past wrongdoing, build a case, and seek a conviction. Intelligence, however, looks at threats that could be coming down the line and seeks to use unclear pieces of intelligence to prevent threats and gain additional intelligence. It's the difference between an analyst and an agent. And right now, the agent culture is still very dominant at the FBI. Now, this isn't to say the FBI hasn't made great strides. They have. But it's important to recognize that adding a new responsibility to CSIS will not necessarily be easy or quick, even though it may be necessary and important. Overall, we found this bill to have sound principles and policies. This bill seeks to better share information and prevent the commission of terrorism. We hope that our testimony in providing the U.S. experience will inform your work on this bill.
Fine. Thank you very much, and appreciate the courtesy and the pickup of tempo. So thank you. We will now go to for the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. You have the floor. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just before I begin, I was just in Washington on Monday and Tuesday with the World Jewish Congress, so our American friends are here. I want to say that at Congress and numerous meetings we had with legislators, they pointed out that Canada was really a beacon for leading the legislative approach to promoting safety from terrorism society. So it certainly felt good as a Canadian to be in the U.S., and thank you for being here with us. I'm pleased to be here today along with Shimon Fogel to speak on behalf of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the advocacy arm of the Jewish Federations of Canada. Jews are consistently targeted by hate and bias-related crimes in Canada at a rate higher than any other identifiable group. While this ancient toxic hatred is not unique to our country, it is rightly constrained to the margins of liberal democratic societies such as ours. However, anti-Semitism is increasingly manifesting in brutal acts of terrorism inspired by a warped Islamist ideology, as we've all seen in the recent tragic events in Belgium, France, and Denmark. When terrorists strike, it is often against the Jewish community. There's a significant justified fear among many Canadian Jews that what has taken place in European cities is equally possible here. I'm sure you're all familiar with the recent video posted by Al-Shabaab calling for an attack on the West Edmonton Mall. Some of you may be surprised to learn why this particular target was selected, as opposed to, say, the Rideau Centre. The West Edmonton Mall was chosen specifically because its owners are Jewish, a fact that understandably heightens anxiety in our community. Nous sommes reconnaissants que le gouvernement actuel de même que ses prédécesseurs.
We are grateful that the current government and its predecessors have taken significant steps to protect Canadians from terrorist violence. The Security Infrastructure Program and the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act are recent integral initiatives that have helped to make our lives safer. Our vibrant community is diverse, full of divergent points of view, and represented across the political spectrum. There is, however, a significant consensus in support of additional measures to counter terrorism in general, and Bill C-51 in particular.
Remarks on 4 aspects of the bill that we have found through our community consultations to have particular resonance. The first element of C-51 that I would like to discuss is the provision for the seizure of terrorist propaganda. This seizure would empower the courts to order the removal or seizure of vicious material, often encouraging the murder of Jews. Removing this heinous propaganda, particularly from the Internet, would limit its capacity to radicalize Canadians and inspire attacks. Again, at our recent meetings of the World Jewish Congress, we had members from Europe, and I must say they live in fear. And they feel that all of that terrorist promoting on the Internet, the jihadi terrorist websites, are really out of control and need to be removed. And they kind of speculate or wonder why it is that we're able to remove heinous criminal things like pedophilia from the internet, but not terrorist rantings. Our community is committed to promoting civil liberty and free expression, but neither can be absolute. While the seizure of terrorist propaganda would place limits on acceptable speech, it is, in our view, a legitimate and appropriate restriction, demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. Nous avons vu un nombre croissant d'exemples d'attaques inspirées par les messages de groupes terroristes.
We have seen increasingly numerous examples of attacks inspired by the messages of terrorist groups, but which are not the result of direct calls for specific actions. The seizure of terrorist propaganda would address this trend and contribute to efforts to counter radicalization in Canada.
Of the advocacy or promotion of terrorism. This is an important complement to the seizure of terrorist propaganda. Existing criminal laws on incitement are very specific and require an incident that will likely cause a breach of the peace. Radicalization is a cumulative phenomenon, with no single input necessarily leading directly to an attack. Comme nous l'avons vu, des individus commettent de plus en plus.
As we have seen, individuals are increasingly perpetrating terrorist attacks on their own initiative, not due to any single call for action. This provision addresses these limitations and enables the arrest of those fueling extremist violence. Some critics have argued that this provision is too broad. However, terrorist recruiters and plotters have likely already taken note of the limitations of existing legislation and adjusted their approach accordingly. This enables them to continue encouraging attacks while technically remaining on the right side of the law.
Of al-Qaeda turned MI5 double agent Ayman Dean recounted to the BBC his experience skirting UK laws prohibiting incitement to terrorism. He was free to give theological justification promoting al-Qaeda's actions without violating the law. But he noted, quote, "You can't specifically urge someone to go. You can't specifically call for an attack. You have to be clever about how you phrase your words," end quote. The appeal by al-Shabaab was deemed by the RCMP to be, quote, "a very general comment. It wasn't a specific threat," unquote. C-51 would make general calls for terrorism offenses a criminal offense, making it more difficult for individuals or groups to encourage attacks against Canadians. It would deny those intent on inspiring, radicalizing, or recruiting Canadians to commit acts of terror the legal way to be clever but dangerous with their words. While the seizure of terrorist propaganda and the criminalization of advocacy or promotion of terrorism are important tools, they are not by themselves sufficient to confront the twin scourges of terrorism and radicalization. We recommend the establishment of a parallel national de-radicalization program focused on marginalizing violent extremism within affected communities. Such a program could work with both communities targeted by terrorism, like ours, and those grappling with radicalization. Our community stands ready to do its part in the endeavour to ensure that the Canada we love stays safe for all its residents. This program would complement C-51 and would help communities battling radicalization to empower moderate voices and delegitimize hate. Combined, C-51 and a national de-radicalization program could go a long way toward preventing individuals from choosing the path of terrorism in the first place. The third element I wish to discuss is oversight. CIS's expanding role is an important modernization that will further enable the disruption of terrorism before Canadian lives are imperiled. However, just as Canadians stand to benefit from a more robust to counter terrorism that emphasizes prevention, a concurrent and measured increase in the review of CIS's activities is necessary. CERC has done a good job with a limited mandate and even more limited resources. Both should be expanded. La surveillance de SCRS a été une des enjeux.
Oversight of CISIS was one of the most cited issues noted during our community consultations. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of time, I am not able to speak about all 7 of our specific concrete recommendations. I will mention 2 and invite you to refer to the written brief we have submitted to the committee, which describes all of our proposals in detail.
Should be strengthened to enable review of CISIS activities across government agencies. This would render all CISIS operations accountable to the same degree. We also believe that the chair of SERC should be an officer of Parliament required to provide regular reports to Parliament on its review activities. The fourth and final element of C-51 I wish to discuss is privacy. We support empowering government departments to share information more effectively for security purposes. However, some of the language in the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act could be adjusted to establish sufficient limitations and safeguards to ensure that intrusion into the privacy of Canadians is not abused. Specifically, we recommend the bill be amended to constrain information sharing to threats to the security of Canada as defined in the CSIS Act, and that the scope of sharing stop short of, quote, with any person for any purpose, end quote, set out in Section 6. Additionally, the committee should consider updates to the Privacy Act to make government institutions more accountable going forward. Before I conclude, I would like to suggest one more item for your consideration. Mark Garneau's private member's bill, C-510, is currently before Parliament and has been endorsed by all parties. This important legislation would extend hate crime penalties beyond houses of worship to schools and community centres. I encourage the members of this committee to consider dropping the zero and including the contents of C-510 as an amendment to C-51. Barring that, I hope you will work to ensure Mr. Garneau's private member's bill passes quickly. In conclusion, C-51 contains important measures that will help to counter radicalization and prevent terrorist attacks. While we believe there are areas for improvement, this legislation is necessary and beneficial to update Canada's anti-terrorism toolkit. Merci. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much. And now we will now hear from the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association representation. Mr. Mia.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've been before many committees, including this one, in the past. The Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association has testified before committees on national security and human rights matters in the past, and we're happy to do that today. My name is Ziad Mia. I'm a member of our Legal Advocacy Committee. With me is Mr. Muid Purboy. He is the Vice Chair of that committee. And we also just want to thank Professors Roach and Forsesi for their work, which I think is a contribution to the study of this bill and has been a public service, which has been very helpful to our organization, but to many others as well. We share your concerns on national security and also on rights, and we don't think they're mutually exclusive. We think, as the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association, some of you on committee have seen me before, we're not opposed to taking reasonable and proactive measures to deal with threats to the security of Canada, including terrorism, as well as crime in terms of the criminal law. But we think that when we do those things, they need to meet a number of criteria. I'll give you three main criteria. It needs to be demonstrably justified, consistent with the rule of law and the Charter of Rights, and if this bill in particular is about terrorism, it actually needs to make us safer. Bill C-51 is fundamentally flawed. It does not meet these criteria. It is a Faustian bargain, a trade with the devil, if you will, where we're trading our rights to gain a false sense of security. We shouldn't be trading rights to get security. We should be getting both. Indeed, we'll be less safe, as you've heard from many witnesses, including Mr. Boisvert, who said they're overworked at CSIS. We'll be chasing red herrings, chasing people that shouldn't be chased, harvesting information that shouldn't be harvested, while the real terrorists and the real threats might slip through the cracks and hurt all of us. So it doesn't make us safer at the end of the day. I've sent my written submissions in to the committee. I think they're being translated, so unfortunately I can't give you a unilingual copy. You will get them at some point soon. I'm going to talk about a few things today. The written submissions go into much more detail, so I please encourage you to look at that if you get a chance. And that's available on our website as well. And the information sharing piece especially troubles me. It's quite complex. I've also taken a minute to do a little chart up for all of you. It's in the submission, and it's available here if you want it today, just to get a handle on how information flows. And Bill C-51 raises many unanswered questions. In the submission, I think I list about 40 or 50 questions that just, to me, as a lawyer, it's a big question mark. I don't know, it's not clear, essentially. So I'll ask you to look at those, please. Bill C-51 has been styled and marketed as a bill about terrorism. In fact, it's the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015. But it is not a bill about anti-terrorism. This is a broad national security bill that creates a bit of a nanny state. Professor Forsese called it the largest national security bill he's seen. I'll walk through a few of the provisions, knowing that my time is limited, and I'll invite your questions for discussion. Let me talk about the information sharing portions. Anyone in intelligence will tell you that finding a terrorist is finding a needle in a haystack. What the information sharing does, it's so vague and broadly drafted. We are adding about 16 truckloads of hay. Those of you from the prairies, I mean, I don't know if Ms. Nawaz is here. I'll tell you, it's probably not a good idea to add more hay to that hay pile to look for that needle. We need to get at the needle and not add more hay. And CISA is doing that. It creates a whole of government information sharing regime with no supervision or control, absolutely none. This is a recipe for a disaster, as we know from the Arar affair. And in fact, I think Bill C-51's information sharing is actually anti-Arar. Professors Roach and Forsese say that it has Arar amnesia. It allows for information sharing and manipulation across multiple points in government and has distributed decision points across government. So you know when people are making decisions across government, it can lead to trouble because there's no consistency and there are no meaningful safeguards. Bill C-51 creates the foundation for big data gathering and analysis. It is not simply we have information. It's the manipulation, sharing, and predictive analysis that's the issue. Ed Snowden talked about that. The broad information sharing also extends to sharing with foreign governments, those with questionable human rights records. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, we could be sharing information with those sorts of governments on Canadians. And we know the risks, according to Snowden, of what happens when we share information broadly and we do big data analytics. And in today's world, all of you have a smartphone in your pocket, and you know if you make a horrible tweet, you can't reel it back. But when we make a mistake in security information sharing and we share my information or yours with the Saudi regime and there's a mistake in it, you can't reel that back. You can't pull that back. We can fix it here, but once that information is out, you can't get it back. Excuse me for a second. We've heard from many people that we shouldn't be worried about Bill C-51 because if you're not a terrorist, what do you have to worry about? But consider what types of nonviolent activity. This is the lawful protest and dissent exemption. First of all, the criminal code doesn't include the word lawful, so there's an inconsistency in the law. That why does one act have lawful and one doesn't? But unlawful doesn't mean criminal terrorist activity. You and I are both agreed that we need to get those people who do those sorts of things, and we need to prosecute. We just celebrated, March is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's Selma March and the Civil Rights Movement. I encourage you to look. They were arrested. Dr. King, Reverend Abernathy, student leaders were all arrested. For what? Illegal activity. Unlawful assembly, illegal marching. And King was a Gandhian. I'm a South African by birth, and Gandhi spent a lot of time there. Gandhi was arrested for the same things. So King and Gandhi were involved in illegal, unlawful activities, but they were nonviolent. And the problem is we're dragging people into the national security dragnet. Yes, if someone trespasses, charge them for trespass. But they shouldn't be dragged into the national security dragnet. That's the problem, and then their information may end up somewhere else. We've been told by many that there is oversight. What are you talking about? There's oversight on this bill because there's judicial oversight. Well, it's either incorrect or disingenuous because Section 9 of the Security Information Sharing Act gives the government immunity from negligent harms done from information sharing, including negligent harms. And that breeds impunity. I mean, the future Arars won't even have the recourse he had. Talk a little bit about CSIS and the reduction of threats to the security of Canada. This is new, unprecedented police powers. This essentially undoes everything the MacDonald Commission told us about. It takes us back to the pre-MacDonald Commission era. The whole point of having the MacDonald Commission was to separate intelligence and police work because of the mistakes and abuses, illegal activities done by the RCMP Security Service in Quebec against sovereignists and others. So we repeat making those mistakes again. You know, people may not have liked sovereignists, but they had a legal right to do what they were doing and to say what they were saying. I don't agree with it, but they have that right, so they shouldn't be abused by the police. We're opening a can of worms here by doing that. Unfortunately, it will also strengthen silos. I think Mr. Boisvert referred to this a bit, that CSIS will try to do things on its own. And that I have a problem with, because if we're trying to integrate, and I think there should be some integration and sharing of information, but if we're giving CSIS these disruption powers, essentially what we're doing is we're giving them police powers, and institutional mindsets will be, why do we need to call the RCMP? We'll just finish the job ourselves. When what they should be doing is intelligence gathering, building the case, then flipping it to the RCMP for enforcement and a trial, which builds confidence. We just saw the Toronto 18 trial. Well, Toronto 18 was a while ago, but via rail trial. That was an open, public case which builds confidence and built on evidence. And that is what we need. And I'll talk a little bit about CSIS law-breaking warrants, which I call them. They're open-ended, and courts, again, are said to be a protection in this case. But they're not. This happens in complete secret, ex-parte hearings. There's no ongoing supervision from that judge. And worse, it turns the role of the judiciary completely upside down. This is not the role of judges in our system. Security certificate judges have said they're uncomfortable in secret processes. This takes them further and conscripts them into the illegal acts and dirty business that CSIS will engage in. And to say that judges are the oversight, the other issue that's troubling in that case is CSIS has a track record. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up here. CSIS has a track record of misleading courts, misleading the Security Intelligence Review Committee. The last report says that, and breaching constitutional rights. That's all on the record. Lack of candor with courts. I'll wrap up, Mr. Chair. So I'll just quickly say the secrecy in the no-fly list, very problematic, Kafkaesque approach. Mr. Ansara said that the U.S. fly list was struck down, again, for that opaque process. This is going to fail, I think, on the same grounds. Criminalizing expression. When the Prime Minister said, Charlie Hebdo, we support free speech, I am 110% with the PM, but we can't criminalize speech that's not close to criminality at home. I agree that I'm offended by speech as well. That's hateful, anti-Semitic as well. But it needs to be close to criminality. We live in a liberal democracy. We allow vulgar and offensive and unpatriotic speech to prevail if it's not criminal. I will wrap up by telling you that we're recommending not moving forward with this bill. We recommend first fix the national security operations and put some supervision in. Look at the Iran inquiry and other inquiries that have told us to do that.
Sir, you're well over time. I'm sorry.
Okay. We look forward to a respectful discussion.
Fine. Thank you very much, and we thank you for your contributions. And we will now go to a round of questioning, and they'll be reduced to 5 minutes. Carry on. Ms. James, you're up first.
Actually, I will be passing my time to Mr. Norlock.
Mr. Norlock, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was hoping Ms. Nawaz is here, but since this is televised, I can. I'm sure she'll be able to see my comments. When we talk about how someone's dressed, I just need to let folks know that I received a Roman Catholic education from grade 1 to 13, mainly by nuns who wore similar garb. I also spoke to priests who told me that they removed their Roman Catholic collar when they were in Quebec because of some of the discrimination that they felt, because in that particular area there was a movement afoot to secularize society, especially in those areas. I was taught by a lay teacher who told me that she went to a school in the Upper Ottawa Valley, a separate school. The kids, when they walked home from school, had run-ins with the Protestant kids because they went to a separate school, not a public school. My children were raised in a family where discrimination, where we at the dinner table made sure that we didn't discriminate. When I hear comments coming across the table from other people, other politicians that hint that this act has something to do with discrimination because of the way people look, or it's nowhere in it does it describe that. Canadians need to know, my constituents need to know, that bigotry and discrimination is an equal opportunity evil. It sees no color, it sees no race, and this act has nothing to do with that. And anyone who says that, I would say there are motivations behind it. We hear from lawyers. Lawyers will take up the cause for people because they believe in it, but some lawyers are saying this is discrimination and it's bad. Other lawyers have come before this committee and say, so you're entitled to your opinion, but that does not necessarily make it correct. That's why we have a democracy. That's why we are here today. So please do not look at this saying that, oh, well, since the government of the day brought it in, they must be discriminatory against me and against any particular. Nowhere in this Act does it say so. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, because, I mean, I can describe discrimination. Everybody in my family looks like me, and everybody I'm talking about looks like me. So there, and I mentioned to another witness last night about the IRA, which was a terrorist organization trying to raise money in Canada. Today, it would be classed as a terrorist organization. So this has absolutely nothing to do with the color of someone's skin, with the country they come from, but everything about who they are and what they want to do that is illegal, and we're dealing specifically with terrorism here. So, Mr. Bucci, having looked over your resume, I think you're very well placed to discuss the need for reliable information to be received by the right people and at the right time. The first part of this legislation is about encouraging information that is relevant to national security and that it be shared with national security agencies. In today's day and age, this is obviously critical. Could you share your thoughts on the need for information sharing?
Well, we learned very quickly that the lack of information sharing provides fundamental insecurity. When we're not talking about gathering new information, as my colleague has mentioned, it's information already resident, collected legally by different parts of the Canadian government. The inability to share that information is crazy. Anybody who thinks, everybody always says, oh, big data, my God, it's going to, you know, it's the Big Brother coming in 1984. You know, I'm sorry, big data is here. It operates on everything we do, and it gives you an advantage. Should there be oversight? Do you need to watch this stuff? Yes. But to try and say, we're not going to do it, let's just put it aside, is a fool's errand. That information needs to be shared. We have the capability to share it accurately, to go through the multiple haystacks and find a needle if we have the right amount of hay there. If you don't have all the hay in the stack, you're going to miss the needle. So you do need to do that. So I agree. You've got to do the information sharing. It is absolutely essential. You do need to make sure the wrong information doesn't get in the wrong hands, but I think reading this bill that it's people who own it legally and they share it with people who have the authority to act on it for these specific issues, not helter-skelter for anything that they want to.
Time is up, Mr. Norlock. We want to go to Mr. Garrison, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for appearing this morning. Interesting perspective from the Heritage Foundation in the U.S., and I appreciate the testimony you gave this morning. I also want to say that I have the written brief from CEJA, and you have some very specific recommendations that we have not heard from other witnesses. In particular, where you have recommended the chair of SERC should be an officer of Parliament and provide regular reports to Parliament. I think that's a very practical and very important recommendation that you've made, so I thank you for bringing that to us. And I also want to say that I do understand the concerns that you've expressed as a community that is very often subject to hate crimes and hate propaganda. But as I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to have to restrict my questioning. I want to go to Mr. Mia from the Muslim Lawyers Association. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between the purposes of this bill and the powers that are there? Do you see a connection between the purposes as they're laid out and the powers?
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. As I mentioned in my opening, the title of the bill is the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015. Which would lead someone to believe that this is about terrorism. And certainly, if you look at the backgrounders on government websites that are promoting legislation and what the public discussion from the Prime Minister and others have been, is that this is about terrorism, a particular type of terrorism that we're going to challenge. And that's fair enough if that's what it's about. But when I downloaded it and looked at it, it's certainly not about that topic. So let's take, for an example, what I call the SCISA, the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act. The definitional section, so that's the foundational authority of that act, it's about undermining the security of Canada, and then it has a long list, I think about 9 or 10, don't quote me on the number, but it's a long list of items. One of those items is terrorism, which again boggles me because terrorism is not a crime in the criminal code. It's terrorist activity and terrorist offenses. So I don't know there's a mismatch there. So if lawyers at Justice are hearing that, you might want to clean that up because there's a mismatch. There's no such thing as terrorism as a crime. And that's an unlimited list. So it's including all those things. It could be other things. So my question is, who adds to that list? And it's so broad-ranging that, again, it could capture unlawful but peaceful activity. So if you're protesting and blocking a road, yes, you may be trespassing and need to be charged with that, but you don't need to be dragged into the national security dragnet. That's the concern. So it becomes a broad national security bill about undermining the security of Canada. And then if you look at the Section 5, all of government can share into this pool of 17 agencies all the information. As Mr. Bucci said, big data is here. Yes, it is. And they do have, this is lawful information the government of Canada has. And they're sharing it with these 17 agencies. But my disagreement with Mr. Bucci, respectfully, is that it's not just that, it's the mandate. How did they first collect that information? Now they're sharing it for another purpose. And second, big data is, it's not the bogeyman, but yes, businesses do it. But when governments do it, it can be dangerous. Ed Snowden's told us that. It's the derivative work when you take pieces of disparate information, work them into through algorithms into predictive analysis. You know, when President Obama said metadata is nothing, if you know a little bit about your phone, metadata is something. So it's disingenuous to say, you know, it's the existing information. It's derivative information as well. So Section 6 totally disconnects the Act. Section 6 of the information sharing, I believe, is unconstitutional on its face. It says you can share that information with anyone for any purpose, not for terrorism, not for undermining the security of Canada, for any purpose. And I want to know what those purposes are. And any logical lawmaking would say the purpose needs to connect to the powers. And this goes on in the bill. There's, you know, CSIS's powers are about the security of threats to the security of Canada, not about terrorism.
So just as we're about to run out of time, on the question of sharing, who do you see that this bill allows sharing with, both in terms of information and the no-fly list? Is this with foreign entities and private businesses? Is that allowed in the bill?
Briefly. Yeah, so size of Section 6 says share with anyone for any purpose, that information that's in that pool. And because the Minister of Transport and the Public Safety Minister have the no-fly list info, that can then, the way I see it, if you look at the chart, can feed into the CISA bubble, which is so broad, and then that, through Section 6 and the 17 agencies, can leave the country.
Fine, thank you. Now, 5 minutes, Mr. Blancy, please.
Thank you. Mr. Bucci, you're, I guess you could say, an outsider. You're not caught up in the politics of our country. And it's always interesting to me that those who oppose the bill, this bill, say things like, of course we're against terrorism. We want to fight terrorism, but not this bill. And go into a great deal of fear-mongering, which you've just heard. You know, it could do this, and it's unconstitutional. It's going to abrogate rights. And, you know, really, Canadians don't really know who to believe. So you're an outsider. You've studied these issues for many, many years, dealt with them, led efforts against them. What's your take on this approach to combating terrorism and the jihadist threat here in Canada?
Well, I think it's quite obvious that the writers of the bill understood that this was going to be a thorny issue. You're not foolish. You recognize that in a democracy we have these kind of healthy debates, and we need to. We should always be ready to protect our constitutional liberties. As a conservative, we have a problem with this because we like security. We want the security guys and gals to have everything they need, but we're really kind of big on civil liberties and individual rights. We don't ever want to lose those. So this is a tough thing. If it were that easy, you wouldn't have to take it to the House of Commons to write the law. Everybody just do it. I think this is a good faith effort to do that. Is it perfect? Probably not. It's made by humans. will it change over time as incidents come up, as a case comes up because somebody gets policed up that shouldn't have, and it goes through the judicial review process and eventually gets thrown out and you adjust the law? Absolutely, that'll happen. As I said, we're going through that now in the United States. I would expect that over time you will do that here in Canada. I think this is a good adjustment to your existing laws. It will give you more security, but showing incredible respect for the civil liberties of your people. And as you go forward, I think anything that's left undone will get worked out.
We've heard this morning that this bill is not about terrorism. Would you comment?
I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. I think it's everything about terrorism. As someone who, both in the executive branch in our Department of Defense and as a soldier, an Army Green Beret, I fought terrorism at both the operational level and tactical level and the strategic level. You have to do the things that are mentioned here to some degree or you're going to lose. And I, for one, don't want to see Canada lose that battle any more than I want my country to lose it. We're kind of in this together, and we don't want to see that happen because the people we're fighting, particularly right now, are pretty heinous individuals, and we really just can't afford to let them win.
I agree with that, and you probably are familiar with a recent article in The Atlantic called What ISIS Wants. Talked about their foreign policy, which is an offensive jihad, forcible expansion into countries that are ruled by non-Muslims, etc. I won't go into the whole article. I'd like for you to comment, because we really need to understand exactly what we're trying to protect ourselves and our country against.
Again, as I mentioned, this is a very small slice of the Islamic world. I mean, a tiny one, thank goodness. But they believe with all their heart that in the declaration of the Caliphate, they're going to take over the world. In America, before 9/11, we didn't believe al-Qaeda when they said they were at war with us. And it took finally 9/11 for us to realize, gosh, they actually meant it. We need to take ISIS at its word that they want to expand this caliphate around the world. They'll do anything they need to do that, including killing everyone in this room. And we need to recognize that and adjust our policies to it. Always respectful of our rights and liberties, always protecting the things that make our countries unique, but we do have to take measures that protect ourselves because these guys are serious, it's real, and they're bad people.
Thank you.
You have about 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, Mr. Cape, I wonder if you'd comment on the questions that I've just addressed to Mr. Bucci.
I think that the bill addresses many of the concerns that our community faces with anti-Semitism, and our community has just been the subject of these terrorist attacks all around the world. Again, I was with someone who's just like me, the president of his community in Denmark, who took on leadership in a community to, just help build it. And now he's got armed guards guarding schools of children because one lone gunman that they knew about came in and shot the place up, and killing a security guard. And they're living in fear. But their governments aren't moving like our government is. And I think that's making a big difference here, and we as Canadians are fortunate for it.
Fine, thank you very much. And now we would like to welcome Mr. Vaughan, replacing Mr. Easter, and you have the floor, sir.
A quick question to Mr. Bucci. Your country enshrines the right of citizens to bear arms, in part out of an experience of a revolutionary experience in order to protect the liberties of individuals. And your Constitution is framed with the opening phrase, "We the people." You mentioned civilian oversight. In your country, that would be congressional oversight, civilians who oversight is delegated to. Why is that so important in terms of public safety?
Well, I think because there's humans in all of those organizations that have been mentioned, and as noted, they occasionally screw up. Whether they do it with malice or they do it by accident, doesn't matter. If they violate the law, there needs to be some process in place that recognizes that possibility and can adjust to it. I think
So if this bill fails to strengthen or enhance civilian oversight or parliamentary oversight, would it be a failure in your perspective?
It would be a danger, not necessarily a failure, because I think these things evolve.
A danger to whom?
A danger to the civil liberties piece. You need some sort of oversight.
A danger to citizens.
You need some sort of oversight, yes, sir.
I note that Mr. Cape agrees with that perspective. Is that true?
With which perspective?
That parliamentary oversight is critical.
Yes. Yes, and we agreed that, our proposal was that there should be improvements of oversight.
What would it say about Parliament if it failed to listen to your advice?
I think that you guys are going to make the right decisions for Canadians and come up with the best set of structures that's going to protect us while hopefully moving the ball forward and down the field in the oversight of the anti-terror authorities.
Mr. Mia, are you aware of any testimony or any submission, I know you've been watching this closely, that has recommended reducing oversight or recommended the status quo as a preferred option?
I can't recall anyone recommending reduced oversight, but I think a lot of witnesses that I've seen have certainly said that we need oversight of the security services.
The other common denominator in testimony from both government witnesses and opposition witnesses is the need for prevention strategies. You didn't comment on that. I'm curious as to what prevention strategies you think would be most effective in preventing the problem, which is far more effective than dealing with it in its aftermath.
And I think it's a package, obviously, that you need. You need interdiction. You need intelligence, law enforcement interdiction to prevent or prosecute if something's happened. But certainly, what you want to do is not get there. You do not want to get to the need to interdict or prosecute. You want to prevent. And prevention really requires intelligence, as we've heard from Mr. Boisvert, Mr. Bucci's from the U.S. military, and he can tell you that intelligence can go bad. I mean, you were involved with Secretary Rumsfeld and the Iraq War, and that was intelligence failure. So intelligence can be bad, but what we need to do is focus on good intelligence. And a big piece of the puzzle, if we're talking about, and I think Mr. Boisvert said the threat is wide. Jihadi terrorism, as it's being called, the label on it, is a legitimate and real threat. But if that's the case, we need to engage with those communities where those risks are going to come up. Just like in gangs, you need to work with troubled youth in those communities. The Muslim community needs to be, the mainstream community needs to be a real partner in this, and I don't think some of that is happening. I know the RCMP has done some work, CSIS has done some work. We need to be really encouraging that, and just in all honesty, I mean, I don't think anyone's trying to play a game here. We're just trying to say that the mainstream community, we may have disagreements, and we really want to have productive and cooperative engagement. Really, I don't think anyone has a secret agenda. There may be some rotten apples in every community, and yes, there are probably some youth that either there's the psychopathic one or two, and then there are some that in a gang are going there for belonging or whatever, or misguided. You need to get the psychopaths into the system and prosecute it. You need to get those other youth realigned and moved into society as productive members of society. We're missing that piece. This is this is not an anti-terrorism bill per se. This is a national security bill. It's built on interdiction and surveillance. What we need is not a bill. Law, as a lawyer, I'll tell you, law is not the solution to everything. What we need are operational issues, improving national security and oversight, making that better, and we need effective community engagement so that everybody's part of the solution and that we're not dividing the country.
Fine. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughan, the time is up here now. On behalf of the committee, we would certainly like to thank Mr. Brove, Mr. Mia, Mr. Bucci, Mr. Insera, Mr. Cave, Mr. Bogle. Thank you so much for your contributions today, and I can assure you they are most helpful in helping shape the direction and the decisions of this committee. Thank you very kindly for coming today. Adjourned.